I love the idea of just starting.
Mm-hmm.
It's just happening. So let's start.
Okay, we're started.
All right. Welcome to Impractical Magic, a comedy podcast about dating, creativity, and being too self-aware for your own good. I'm Christiana Benton.
And I'm Jade Monroe. I
So
was trying to do your smoky voice. Did it work?
I have a smoky
A
voice.
little bit.
That's probably from smoking.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a pandemic, so it's fine.
It's been, for me, an on and off 12 years of pandemic, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
It's an
but
existential pandemic.
I also think that ever since I stopped being like a server in a restaurant or like answering phones, my voice just continues to get deeper because I don't have to exercise that upper register of like, hi, how are you? Welcome to,
Mm.
you know. So,
Yeah, it's really weird. I feel like mine's just naturally like up there.
I mean, your voice is like Megan Mullally straight up.
I
And
know.
but I love it. I think it's so fun.
Like our listeners are so patient.
And also, thanks so much for listening. If you listened to the first one, we had
Yeah,
such a
thank
great
you.
reception, and it was so nice.
It
And
really was. I'm sorry if my voice or my laugh could rival Pete Holmes.
we're not sorry, and it did not. No, it
We're
was
gonna
great.
work harder on the audio this time. We're learning.
Yeah, we are learning. There's definitely a learning curve, but we are really proud of it, and we had a lot of fun with it. So, um, if you didn't listen to the last episode, on the last episode called Jade Has a Stalker, we talked about unhealthy obsession. And to be honest, no one really knows more about that than us.
Yeah.
Because we both have obsessive compulsive disorder. We've bonded over it.
We have.
It was definitely like an initial source of friendship for us.
Yeah.
And you've been clinically diagnosed, right?
Yeah. I was
I,
when I was 16.
okay. I will get into the story of it. I have not been clinically diagnosed, but I think as this podcast goes on, it'll be pretty evident that that's what's going on. And technically, I was diagnosed by Maury Povich. So I'll tell you all about that later.
The reliable. Hey man, Dr. Drew did that show on OCD in our teens. I don't know if you ever saw it,
No,
but
he did.
that's actually when we get into it, when we talk more about like the phenomenon thing that I brought up with you the other day, teaser.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah.
that's when I realized that universally people have like the taboo obsessions, and
Oh.
that what I was experiencing, like I wasn't alone in it. So I don't know about you. I know a lot of OCD sufferers will probably be drawn to this. We're going to use as many hashtags as we can. And we know
Yeah.
you. We know you're going to Google this because we live in that space. And actually, I do want to give a trigger warning because we are going to cover
Totally.
as many types as we can. And we're going to be as honest as we can be, even if it's a little uncomfortable, because it is important to spread awareness. And I think that I think people really don't understand what this is, and people sling it around like a casual term, and it's really not
Totally.
casual. And honestly, I'm not offended by that, but some people are.
Yeah.
So if that is like part of your dialogue, just be cognizant of the fact that this is actually a really plaguing disorder, and yeah, it's pretty serious stuff. So
Yeah, that's well said. And I mean, it is serious and it is heavy, but we are trying
it's
to
also
err.
hilarious. I have a
Yeah,
story about my butthole, so hang tight.
yeah, there's definitely plenty of things. I mean, literally what is in the entirety of Curb Your Enthusiasm is based on one man's neuroses. And here we have
Two
two
hot
people's,
women.
two
Two
hot
hot neurotic women. We're
OCD
changing the name of
havers.
the podcast.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so we have plenty of stories and plenty of quirks, and we'll talk about that. Um, and how it translates into dating and creativity and just trying to do life when your brain is constantly spinning out. So
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
Oh, and just to be clear, obviously, uh, neither Christiana nor myself are licensed counselors. We do not
Shocking.
have any. We get all our information from the U of Tube,
Yeah.
YouTube University.
Yeah.
But we probably have compulsively read more self-help literature, and we have deep sea dived Reddit to the
Yeah.
nth
You
degree.
have. I don't go on Reddit because I know that I'll never come back.
Yeah, like
Because I won't.
there dark times. Like if you have it, man, and you spiral deep, you spiral deep. But yeah, we are not. And please, anything that's worked for us, like we will go over techniques that have worked for us, but that doesn't mean it will work for you. Like I am not on medication. I didn't have a good experience with medication. That doesn't mean medication doesn't work.
Yeah, for sure.
So don't take our word for anything ever, not even just in this episode, just in
Yeah.
general, in the world.
Just don't listen to us at all.
At all.
Shut this
Unsubscribe.
podcast
No,
off
don't.
right now.
JK, please subscribe.
Smash that like button. um, yeah, I mean, this is this is probably going to help us gain followers because if you have OCD,
We're
um,
capitalizing on
yeah, we're just
chaos.
capitalizing on the fact that we're going to get stuck in your brains and you're just going to keep wanting more and coming back.
And
So
guess what? You're going to get more because we have OCD and we're not going to stop
we
making
can't
videos
stop.
about it. We can't stop.
And we're going to get it perfect every time.
We have a list.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess where we should start probably is what OCD is, because it gets, like you said, it gets thrown around a lot. People talk about it when they feel like they need to adjust their fork next to their plate to be in alignment with their knife and they suddenly have OCD, which, like, I agree with you. It doesn't faze me if somebody makes a joke like that. But there are people who but that, I think that has something to do with the fact that it has not debilitated my entire life as a grown adult. It was definitely really debilitating when I was a kid, and it definitely doesn't make life easier by any means. Um, but I think it makes sense that people would be hurt if somebody was throwing that term around and it was something that was, you know, destroying their existence. So let's start from scratch and just talk about what it is. And I'll just read the clinical definitions.
Right, just one more note. When I always feel like I come to podcasts like these when I'm triggered for reassurance if you're
True.
checking. I would ask you to reconsider listening. Like if you're
Yeah.
checking and you have the capacity to stop, no shame if you don't, but try. But then also, if we don't list your type, that doesn't invalidate it. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's not real. It's just as significant. If you're the only person in the world obsessed with one specific thing that nobody else relates to, it's real and you need to like honor yourself. So,
Yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, I think it wasn't even until a couple years ago that I even knew half of these existed. And I feel
yeah.
like every year I find out about a handful of new ones. Sometimes ones that I've dealt with that I didn't even realize was OCD. And then
Hmm.
I read about it and I'm like, oh my God, like some of
Do
these
I
are
even have a personality or is it only
exactly.
obsession?
Well,
Yeah.
that, or I'm like, wow, somebody just described the nuances of my brain, and I just thought everybody was like this. And
Well, also, I think that a lot of people are in the way that everybody experiences intrusive thoughts. And that does not mean you have OCD,
totally.
but everybody experiences them. And
Yeah.
so, if you've ever had a weird, even like stint of obsession, um, your brain chemistry is probably doing the same thing that ours does in a way we can't even escape it, like on a day to day basis.
Yeah, for sure. Um, the clinical definition of obsessive compulsive disorder is a common, chronic, and long lasting disorder in which a person has uncontrollable, reoccurring thoughts or obsessions and or behaviors, which are compulsions, that they feel the urge to repeat over and over. OCD interferes with daily activities and causes significant stress. Typically people would say that you have OCD if it is in some way inhibiting your life. Um, I would say that it can be way more subtle than that. That's a personal opinion, but
I will say this though, I think the question when it comes to inhibiting is like I can't speak for you, but I think I have a very high tolerance at this point, because
Totally.
I would absolutely say, I think from the minute I was probably in infancy, like my mom has told me stories. I don't know. Well, I have a close friend that's experiencing anxiety for the first time forever.
Yeah.
It's just not something they've struggled with, and it's wild because I would say fragments of my life, like I'm talking like 15, I can remember 15-minute fragments throughout my life where I didn't have anxiety, and they were so different that they stood out. So I don't know my life without it.
Yeah.
And um and I can't speak for you or like the severity, but I actually think that I wonder who I would be if I didn't have it.
Yeah, I can relate to that big time. I mean, there are entire swaths of my day that I just don't even remember, like at the end of the day, because I was so busy just spinning my wheels. Um, Whether that's anxiety or OCD or a combination of the two, I don't always know. And I mean, they kind of go hand in hand so much because so much of what drives OCD is anxiety. It is obsessive compulsive disorder is something that you engage in because you are trying to find a way to cope with your stress. So
Mhm.
it's a response to that. So the less anxiety you have in the moment, the less likely you are to be doing that, but the OCD gives you anxiety. It's just like a perpetuating cycle. Um but there is a difference between obsessive compulsive disorder, as you know, and pure O, which pure O is um purely obsessional OCD. And we want to clarify the difference because it pertains to our lives and it pertains to a lot of people's lives. So, purely obsessional OCD or pure O is a type of OCD in which the sufferer engages in hidden compulsions. So instead of like combating intrusive thoughts with visible rituals, things like having to turn the door handle 8 times or a certain thing, or having to like uh I don't know, wash their hands a bunch of times. They have repetitive mental rituals to minimize their stress and anxiety levels. So it's unseen, um, but it's not unnoticed
Yeah.
necessarily. They're
If you
definitely,
have a significant other, they can tell.
yeah. If you have any close friends, they know.
Maybe. I mean, maybe they can tell. I think, it's interesting. And I actually got really triggered in the last podcast, and I was watching it through and I couldn't tell, like from the outside, that I was like, I think I was in rumination for like 15 minutes of it. And I
Huh.
can't even see it in my body language. And I think you get really good at masking it, but also,
Yeah.
now there is somatic therapy. There are all different types of therapy for OCD, and you have to figure out what works for you. But I've done a lot of EMDR, which I don't know if it worked. I'm just being honest. But there's this whole idea too that it can be rooted in trauma. Now there's all this like trauma research. Um, and I think the somatic stuff, I think there's some precedence to that, because I mean, when you're in rumination, you are dissociating. You're completely removed from your body. Like I will get in the car and like not even be thinking and end up in Nashville. And it's not that I'm not cognizant of like that I'm going there, but there are definitely like hours of the day that I lose, like you were saying.
Yeah, it's not just I mean it is a form of absent-mindedness, but
Yeah.
it's much deeper than that. Like I'll have people, I mean, I don't know if this is normal to be honest. Some of this might sound very normal, especially depending on the listener, but it's like I'll have people tell me stories about things that I said, conversations that I had with them like not that long ago at a coffee shop, and like they're like, "You said this thing and it like was really great for me." And I'm like, I don't even remember hanging out. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even
Yeah.
remember that day at all, and it's
Well, and we were talking
nuts.
the other day, like I legitimately, now that I'm a freelancer, especially, I got laid off last year because of COVID, and now I'm doing like freelance writing work. And there are times where I'll sit down to work, and then like 15 minutes later, I'll be like doing weird things, like organizing my sock drawer. And then I'll look up and I'm like, I'm totally compulsing right now. And I didn't
Mhm.
even catch it. And I
Yeah.
think some of it could be the aftermath of 2020 just shaking us and not even knowing our bodies are just grieving that.
Sure.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah. And like OCD and pure O can still overlap. So
yes,
it's funny because as a kid, which we'll get into these stories, but like as a kid, I had very visible compulsions. But as you get older, at least for me, it kind of morphed into pure O because my fear of rejection and just sort of like a normal adult, like, here are the societal norms and here are the non-societal norms. No, Christiana, you don't get to like ask people if they wash their hands after they leave the bathroom, which is like was my favorite thing to do as a kid. I was like, did you wash your hands? It's like, that girl is so annoying. You
mm.
just like get used to not doing those things. um and also my obsessions changed as I got older. uh
Well, and I don't know about you, but I mean, what's wild, my mom pointed this out from birth, every spring and fall, like they go in cycles. It's kind of like bipolar in that a lot of people have different types of cycles. They might be seasonal, they could be daily. Like I know 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. I'm gonna spike. And I know in the spring, like when the weather changes, like this past week, I go through like this period of compulsion and grief, and then in the fall when the weather changes. So
oh
it's interesting to see, and it's always so bizarre because I think sometimes like some themes, which we'll get into, can be all the time, like, but some disappear for like years or weeks, and mine tend to go like months at a time. Like I'll be very fixated on one area, and then the next day I'll just wake up and it'll have switched, and I can feel it in my body that it's changed to something else. And it's funny because like it's so there's some that are more terrifying than others,
yeah.
um and we'll get into that too, but
Yeah, that's so like even that I don't I would I mean I relate to that, but I had never even thought of it as OCD.
mhm.
Like
You know what I used to call it when I was a little girl? The big dark sadness. And I thought that it's so wild the way we process as kids, because I remember thinking that's where my writing comes from. Like,
oof.
like the writing has come to visit me. And and I literally, like, I had a Hello Kitty journal, and I think like I was learning to read, so I guess that would be first grade.
Yeah.
And every time it would come, I would sit down and write poetry, and that's still how I cope when with anything very hard.
Yeah,
Um,
same with songs for me.
yeah.
And I, a lot like looking back on my teen years and stuff, so many of the songs that came out of me and so many of the songs that like people have connected with over the years or whatever came like at that kind of like nighttime, like night. I'm not great at nighttime. I
Hmm.
distract myself with screens, alcohol, literally anything. I'm just like, I, one of the funny things is like everybody talks about sleep hygiene and how you should have a nighttime routine and whatever, a bedtime thing. And I'm like, no, like, I mean, what is it for you? Do you have a lot of compulsions? Like, what are your compulsions? And, um,
Yeah.
or is it mostly puro?
Well, presently, I would say it's pure O for sure. I have a lot of trepidation around finances, but a lot of things. So I, just for context, like I am single, I live alone, and a lot of times things won't get stirred up until you enter situations. So when I enter into a relationship with even a potential, I can go on one date with someone, and it's like my whole life just collapses that night because it's like I your brain just you just get triggered, and it's really overwhelming. And
Mm,
uh, I would say even things that are really motivational, like I could not step into a church right now without immediately going back to the scrupulosity themes. I couldn't um I couldn't go to the dentist. I have a lot of OCD stuff around my teeth. I avoid the doctor. um for a long time too, and we'll get into this when we get into our stories. In high school and college, I had very, very aggressive acne, like cystic acne on my cheeks. And, you know, I, it got to the place where I couldn't even like it's kind of like the body dysmorphia symptoms. Like a lot of those anxiety disorders and their symptoms overlap, but I couldn't even like look into my black iPhone screen because anytime I'd see the surface of my skin and the reflection of the door. So it got to where I just like became so shut off to seeing myself that honestly, I never really look in the mirror. I could do my makeup in the dark. Like I'm so disconnected from my appearance because I struggled with those triggers for so long. And that's definitely not a healthy place to be. But but it's interesting because even if you're not struggling with the obsession presently, there's still coping mechanisms wrapped around it. It's like a sprained ankle that's like overcompensating after it heals. My brain still, there's always a protective. I always check the stove. Like
Same.
I always,
I know it's off. And it's funny because something I've been trying to practice is like, I normally will touch all the knobs of the stove before I go to bed, even if I can visibly see that they are off. I
I
have to
do,
touch them all.
how I remember, I don't know if this is helpful or hurtful, but do in Garden State, how Natalie Portman does something weird? Have you ever seen Garden
Yeah,
State?
but I haven't seen it since high school.
There's this part where she's like, anytime I'm feeling like I want to be totally original, I'm probably watching this. She's like, I make a weird noise or I do a weird dance. Anytime I turn the stove off, I go, it's off. Like I dance and I'll like and I'll be like, did you do your dance? And that's how I remember that I've done it.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
I don't know why I started doing that, but
I get it because I'll do stuff like that too, where I'll have a moment where I know it's something that I always come back to and worry about. So as I'm doing it, I like I take a moment to be like, remember this right now. You did this thing. You don't need to do it again. But something I've been trying to do to like I don't have most of my compulsions, if I have any left, at like external ones are at night. It's like checking the locks on the door, which like I have a deadbolt and a chain, so like whatever.
oddly, I
probably
don't
fine.
struggle with the tradition, with the classical. So like the fact that I have a stalker and like for a long time, I do now, don't come near me. I never locked my door. Like I don't have a lot of the classical symptoms.
That's bananas.
Yeah, it's weird. It's all the weird shit.
You do lock it now though.
I do lock it now.
Yeah, let's just let everybody who might be
My door
listening.
is locked and I have one of
And
those sticks and I have an aggressive.
sticks?
Yeah, it's like a jam stick.
Oh. And alarms and cameras and barbed
And
wire.
yeah, and an aggressive temper
and police surrounding the home and
big ones,
yeah.
hot ones.
Yeah, hot police.
For me.
Hot police because everybody loves police right now.
Yeah. Actually, the policemen that came to my house were so hot. And I was like, there are 2 hot cops that are taking me seriously in my house right now.
I love it. 2 hot cops taking somebody seriously. That's good.
Yeah.
But what I was gonna say is that I've been trying to practice not touching the stove and just going over and looking at it and having a moment and then just being like,
observe the stove.
We don't need to touch the stove, which is called checking, which if you have OCD, you have things that you ruminate about that you're obsessed with. And they can be separated into themes, but a lot of them overlap and a lot of people have multiple at the same time. The way I talk about it, at least for me with my therapist and just with other people, is it feels 100% like whack-a-mole. The moment that one goes down, another one pops up. Like I will be struggling with scrupulosity for 3 months or something, right? And that kind of fades into the background and now it's health OCD or it's something along those lines. And then like you said, get in a relationship and our OCD is like right there. And I don't deal with that. I don't deal with relationship OCD unless I'm in it.
If you're a man and you have empathy and you have a beard and you like smell good, you can slip into the podcast DMs.
Yeah. I mean, we both check them, but
we don't check them regularly.
I'll just funnel you right over to Jade. I'll say, unless you're hot and I like you, then I'll just steal you away from her.
Yeah, and
Just kidding. We don't have the same
actually,
taste at all.
I think that Christiana should screen the people that I date because
True. I'm not saying that as a power move. I mean,
no,
I'm
I
trying to
can't
keep you safe.
tell. It's because I'm like a little baby deer.
You will send me screenshots of people, and I'm like, what? What?
I don't know. I think we talked about this in the last podcast, how I like gas station chic men. Like if you have like I need to move to Philly. It's like if you have a car up on cinder blocks, if you have like an American or Canadian, I'm not picky, like flag tattooed on your body.
Canadian flag
If
tattoo.
you were like in a metal band and you have like gauges, I think I'm manifesting right now.
Stop.
Anyway,
Don't
let's get
manifest this.
back on
Well, I
topic.
was just gonna say that you always talk about how like you love a gas station chic guy.
I
And
do.
but my question is, which part is the chic?
I don't know. I think it's like the glistening intellect. That's like the charisma.
Ah,
It's like we can both listen to Stain together, but it's like I know you feel Aaron Lewis. Like I know we're like, you know,
yeah. That's the glistening intellect is that they listen to Stained.
someone out there knows what I mean.
Yeah. Anyway, let's read these bad boys. So like you said earlier, a lot of times OCD latches onto things that are considered taboo. So I'm guessing that would sort of change depending on society's standards over time. I
Mm-hmm.
think some of these may not even be things down the road, but for the most part, some of them latch onto things that are taboo, and some of them are just like, for whatever reason, our brain.
Oddly universal. I'll go into one of
Yeah.
those when I tell my personal story that it blew me away. I had no idea.
Yeah. So we have contamination OCD, which is just like germs, dirt, filth, general. Bathroom germs was a big thing for me, like that kind of thing. Um, so harm, where you're just like constantly afraid of hurting yourself or others, but it's not the same as having actual homicidal or suicidal thoughts. You think about like those thoughts will cross your mind, but
And
it's
you're
not,
afraid of them.
you're afraid that you could be the kind of person that could do those things, even though you're like not suicidal and you're not homicidal. You're just deeply afraid that you could be.
Well, it's like, and I don't know if this is like a universally human experience, but you know when if you have ever held a gun for the first time, or if you've ever like the first time you hold a knife, like I remember it was is very specific in my mind the first time I ever held a kitchen knife, and like it's the feeling of holding something dangerous. And I'm sure a lot of people have that flash in the pan thought, but with OCD it latches, and that
Mm-hmm.
fear of the object, like I have been so like afraid of actual objects in my home that I couldn't go into the kitchen, or I would go like I we'll get into this when we talk about like how ritual inspired me, but like I would go at night, I was so afraid of the scissors, I would go tap them and then go back to bed and then go tap them and go back to bed, and I'm thinking I walked through the living room, like my parents were watching TV, how did
Mm-hmm.
no one see, like what, but
Yeah.
no one saw, it's wild.
Yeah. I had the same thing where I was just like afraid that I was gonna sleepwalk and grab scissors and
Hmm.
like kill somebody. I was so afraid of.
I was afraid that I was gonna poison my mom. I had seen what was it, the is the Sixth Sense the one with Bruce Willis where the
Yeah.
mom is poisoning the daughter with,
Yeah.
whatever. I
Uh-huh.
saw that, and
Spoiler alert.
and then later I saw something on a talk show like Mari where they were going over, is it Munchausen's by proxy? I think that's the name of it. And I just, it like the two things back to back scared me so bad that I would not feel comfortable around my mom. I wouldn't feel
Oh.
comfortable around chemicals. Like, yeah, wild.
I didn't know that this was one, but the Just Right OCD, which for me kind of translates into a few of them, sort of like
Mm-hmm.
overlaps with a lot, but it's like you have to do the behavior the correct way, or you have to start over, or you have to like do it, I'm guessing also, till it feels right.
Yeah.
Um
I
and
can't say I relate to that one. That's not one that I have had. But
okay.
if you do have it, you're really not alone. Like, we're here with you in it because it's all the same.
Well, the reason that one's that, I mean, I can, that one is a big one for me. And the
Mm,
reason that that one's so difficult is like you don't even get any fucking relief from like doing something a certain number of times.
no.
Like if I could have washed my hands as a kid, 8 times, that would have saved me, like, honestly, a lot of trouble. Um, there is really very little satisfaction in it. So if you do deal with that, like, my condolences, because it sucks ass. Symmetry OCD or symmetrical OCD kind of speaks for itself. You just want everything to align a certain way or something bad will happen, which, let me also emphasize that that's sort of the crux of OCD. Is it's like you do all this stuff because you're so afraid something bad will happen, and you
Mm.
don't always know what the bad thing is. It's just constantly looming in the background, so
And
it's
it
just a
always
constant
feels
terror.
like it's your intuition. You cannot
Yeah.
distinguish fear from intuition. So, and if you are a, which some of there, for me, there was so much scrupulosity overlap because I've always been like a really spiritual person. And I think one of my themes, like with, relationships is if I want it, God will take it. Anything I want, I'm not allowed to want anything.
Hmm.
And it's like the minute I start liking someone, I think it's going to fail. And then that drives people away. So it's just like this wild thing. And you're like, no, can you just give me a minute? Like, can you? And it's hard to articulate because you just kind of live in fight, flight, or freeze all the time. So I don't know. As I've gotten older, I feel really trapped in my experiences with new people. But I will say
Yeah.
I have friends, uh, like Zeb and Meg, who have gone out of their way to educate themselves. I dated a guy a couple years ago, Greg. He read books on OCD just to try to relate to me. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Well, if you grew up religious at all, like, you are told that like you can't put anything before God, or it's idolatry. And so if you have OCD, your little baby brain latches onto that and goes, well, that applies to everything, so I better not like anything too much. But I
Hmm.
think it would probably be helpful if you described what scrupulosity is, since we're
Sure.
talking about it in such a general weird world where, and it's something I just
Scrupulosity,
learned about.
scrupulosity, for me, I can really only talk about it from my perspective. Just for context, I didn't grow up in the church, so I didn't have a lot, but I still struggled with it even as a kid. Um, Whatever your God construct looks like, and obviously, I was born and raised in Oklahoma. My grandfather was a minister, so like, even though, which is why I didn't grow up in the church, because my mom was like, gonna take a minute.
Yeah,
So,
we're good.
um, I there was still, for me, the figure was Christ, but it can go a couple ways. For me, it was like fear that God's going to punish me. I went through a phase when I was probably 7 or 8 where if I thought a negative thought or thought a cuss word, I thought that God was going to punish me, kill my parents.
Jesus.
Yeah, like, and I'm,
Literally.
ruminating on this all day, just constant control of my thoughts. I would go to my mom and I'd say, Mom, I thought a cuss word. And that kind of overlapped into something that's not scrupulosity, which was I was obsessed with this concept that my parents were going to put me up for adoption if I didn't act perfectly.
Whoa.
So like, I like there was, but scrupulosity is like religious preoccupation. And this is so fascinating because Christiana and I met in the charismatic church, which she
Mhm.
has much further into Pentecostalism roots. But you know what's so interesting about the charismatic church is like, it's so emotional. that while I
Mhm.
was in it, the themes that showed up for me, I had a fixation around God's will. I had a fixation around
Same.
tithing. And this radical Christian culture where it's like, empty your bank account for the faith of the Lord and like, no, God's going to provide. Where some with OCD, that's like, if I
Or
don't do
else.
this, God's going to, and then you go to these spiritual giants and they're like, just say yes. And it's like, well, you tell that to somebody with a compulsion. And it's like, it's not that I'm saying no. So you're in this internal warfare. And you, like, people with OCD compulsively pray.
Mhm.
I used to think when I was in the church that I was just practicing my spiritual gifts, that was what that was. And it's like, no, like, you're compulsively checking. And um you get really fixated on biblical concepts or whatever your faith structure is. I'm sure people that are like Hindu probably get very preoccupied with those constructs and they get really disproportional and strange.
Mhm.
Um, but I think it's interesting because even in more, so I went to a conservative Bible college. Depending on how you're hearing these teachings from the really no matter what kind of radicalism it is, I remember in college where I was in a Baptist, like a Free Will Baptist Bible college, where we would cover things like sexual sin. And I would think anything that, like, I would be so afraid for my boyfriend to kiss me or touch me. And I would think immediately, God's going to take him away. Like, we have to break up. Like, but even to the extreme. So, whatever it is in different areas of the faith that you latch on to, it can make your life a living hell.
Yeah.
And I don't struggle with it anymore, but it's because I've removed myself. So I wouldn't say it's without trigger. It's not resolve.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too that you say that, like, because it overlaps with health OCD in some ways, because like I can remember being like having the most minimal sexual experiences and being like, I guess I gotta go get an STD panel.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I really thought that like sitting on my boyfriend's lap could get me pregnant. Like it,
What? Okay, I
yeah,
was like, that's crazy.
yeah,
Not
like
crazy. We all use the word
but
crazy.
also I wanted to draw out another part of scrupulosity. Some people will have really intrusive sexual thoughts about like the crucifixion, or they'll have
Oh.
really sexual, like, perverse thoughts about like your pastor or Jesus or whatever, whoever, is kind of the, like, whatever is unholy, your brain will wrap. And that's not something I personally struggled with, but I can't even imagine violating to self that feels. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
imagine it, but it's like, I feel like some of these are worse than others. We're going to get into some darker ones that'll be uncomfortable to hear,
Yeah.
but they're just a reality. And whether we've struggled with them or not, we want to cover them as best we can.
Yeah. Because the thing is, it's not, these aren't, when we say sexual thoughts, we're not talking about like actual repressed sexuality.
And we're not talking about enjoying it. We're like talking about, it's like, if I had to describe it, it's like you picture like bracketed explicit image and you're cringing and you
Yeah.
can't turn the thought off and it just loops over and over again, and you adopt all this shame because you're like, I'm thinking about
And
my
then you
pastor
question your, yeah.
naked, and like, and it's not in a salacious, seductive, like saucy, which that's unhealthy too, but like, it's like, it's just different. You don't want the thoughts to be there.
Yeah, for sure. And you're always just kind of, yeah, you just get stuck on things like where somebody else might have a thought and go like, well, that was weird, and move on. You latch on and you go, I've got to dissect this.
This
Like I
means
have to,
something about me. But
yeah,
that's what they say about people with OCD is, and I would say this is that we're deep thinkers, we're deeply cerebral, we're highly creative. And we'll get to this at the end, but like, I really think it's trapped creative energy and probably like spirituality, and it's
Mhm.
probably a culmination of things.
I mean, then there's like a whole branch of OCD that just deals with relationships. Like,
Yeah.
so there are a lot that are like you locked in your own brain, your relationship with yourself. And then there are ones like relationship OCD, which is where you're in a relationship, which we were talking about earlier, and you cannot stop fixating on whether or not this person is the person you're supposed to be with.
Mhm.
And then there are little things about them that will just like stand out to you, and it makes you feel like such a monster. um there's Sexuality OCD, also known as HOCD, which is essentially, depending on what sexual orientation you identify as, you think that you are secretly the other one and cannot trust yourself, cannot. And I've dealt with that. And
And also, I will amend, now it's becoming more there because it is widespread. So in the beginning, just to elaborate, HOCD originally stood for homosexual OCD because straight
Mhm.
people were coming out and they were very worried they were of a different orientation, like they were homosexual. But now it's SO
Oh, okay.
OCD, sexual orientation OCD,
Oh, okay.
because if you are gay, you will worry that you're straight. And I
Yeah.
want to be very clear, like very clear. It's not homophobia. It is
Yeah.
not. Um, Most of my friends are in the LGBTQ plus community, and it's funny because when I am not struggling with sexual orientation themes, my logical mind, like I I think we're all, now that culture is changing, we're evaluating these things we were never allowed to talk about or think about in the church, and like what does it mean, right? Like it doesn't have to mean anything. But the reality is that is totally separate from the fact that, like, I'll go through periods where I can't even listen to like Boy Genius or like King
Uh-huh.
Princess. And honestly, and this is something I've talked with Zeb about, which by the way, shout out to Zeb.
Hey,
Um
Zeb.
yeah, we mentioned them in the last episode, and they reached out to me because I referred to them as she, and we want to be really sensitive to that. So as we're learning, thank you for your patience, and so it's a formal retraction. Um, but
Retracted.
retracted, but your gay friends trigger you, and it's humiliating because you love them with your whole heart, and like you would, like I would die for them, like truly, like their family. But I like I get triggered. For me, it's worth it to be around them even if I'm suffering. And like it has nothing to do with the actual matter itself. It's, I think it's like a OCD kind of has this thing where it's like you're afraid of your own identity in a way,
Yeah.
or that there might be something about yourself that you don't know
And you
hidden
have
deep
to figure it
away.
out.
You have
Like,
to figure out this mental discomfort happening.
yeah. It's funny. I don't, when I'm around my gay friends, like I don't feel triggered. I feel very comfortable. Um, but it's the fact that I feel so comfortable that's triggering to me.
Mhm.
Like I'm like,
Well,
well,
and
what?
you've texted me before. This is something that I didn't really struggle with until um
I brought it up.
no, until I moved to Murfreesboro. I was going through a
Oh,
huge transition, which is usually when OCD rears its head, and I became obsessed with. I always loved Julian Baker, but I became obsessed with Phoebe Bridgers, and
I
I kept
mean,
thinking I'm in love with her, like and it's fine. Like who's not in love with her? Like I'm. That's not triggering for me right now. I apologize to our listeners if any of this is triggering for you, but like the fact that Boy Genius is a band that presents as women who are fluid in their sexuality, unfortunately, that it's wonderful and liberating for them that they're like, we're so for that, like live your truth. For OCD sufferers, it's a hellscape in your mind. And I know there are going to be some listeners that's kind of like, fuck off, like who are you? We're not saying people should live in oppression. We're saying this is a medical issue like that we struggle with.
and also like the thing about it is OCD is just, it really wants black and white thinking. It wants labels, it wants clarity. And so when we're in a new sort of, I mean, we've always had a some semblance of a climate, but we're kind of in like a new, very fast-paced climate in regards to the gender spectrum, in regards to sexual orientation, and it can be very confusing even for people in the LGBTQ plus community.
I
Like,
will say this, checking
yeah,
is like, how did you know? How did you know you were gay? How did you know? Are you sure? Maybe I am. Maybe, what does this mean? What does this mean? It's like there's this frenetic energy about it that's just different.
yeah. And I feel like we're talking about this a lot because you and I both experience this and we
Well, I
talk
was
about
going
it
to say too,
openly.
I had never really struggled with the trigger of looking like like uh like dressing more androgynous and that being a trigger for me. But it is a common symptom of HOCD where it's like,
Is
if
it?
you
I
like to
didn't know
wear,
that.
yeah, it's a common thing. So like anytime you've texted me and you're like, I'm dressed like a lesbian and it's triggering to me, you know, that it's like I don't experience that, but I also dress like the fairy godmother and Cinderella. So
Harry Styles.
yeah, I dress like Harry Styles. Um, and I'm not afraid to like rock a beanie and flannel, whatever that means. I mean, I think no,
Yeah.
but we're all about non-gender specific clothing, like anybody can wear anything. But I think these like stereotypes, these taboos are what keep your brain spiraling, and that's part of her, Christiana's sexual orientation OCD. That's not a trigger for me. So it's different with different people.
Yeah, I've always see that's the thing. I'm still in this place where it's actually been really bad lately in that regard. And then it'll totally dissipate and I won't think about it at all. And something else will come up for, a series of a month or a few weeks or whatever. Um, and I, I'm almost like I feel almost weird about being open about it on here because there's still this thing in the back of my brain that's like you're just like refusing to come to terms with your own sexual orientation. And
And
like,
that's the checking. See, and that's so funny. But here, this is a good example, right? Because we both have it. You are closer to the trigger than me. Like, that's not my current theme right now,
sure.
And so I can talk openly about the fact that it's like, I could probably love a woman.
Mhm.
Whereas you're like in that mental war of like, this is probably sexual repression. And I want to be very clear. Like, guys, it's not the same thing. And out of respect, I would ask, like, my gay friends love to make comments about me turning. That is really insensitive. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, it's just as insensitive as if it were the other way around, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But especially like now that we're coming out and we're telling you that we're coming out and we're telling you, hey,
Yeah,
this
here
is
we
like
are.
really like this is gonna hijack my nervous system.
Yeah,
Please stop.
I was actually going to get to that. I was going to say that I feel very comfortable around my gay friends. I love them to the point where it's triggering to me only because I'm like, well, birds of a feather flock together. So like
Yeah.
I must be, whatever. And I'm not saying that I like don't have I don't ever experience like attraction to another woman, but it's very different than the attraction that I experience with men. If there's a couple walking down the street like and they're both hot, like I'm gonna notice the guy. What, like, again, that's me checking. Like I notice that I notice because I'm checking. But yeah, it is. I have had to have a couple conversations with friends because I get that like you go through this whole long tumultuous process to like be able to come out and feel free in that. And that it's probably so profound and relieving. And you just want everybody to experience that probably the same way that I want people to experience like leaving charismatic Christianity,
Yeah.
and I'm like, come
Or when you
on, the
created
water's
something, when you're
fine.
like, look at this thing that I've birthed out of my body that you're so proud, that's your identity.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting because I'm actually writing some memoirs. Like, I take a lot of memoirs with the LGBTQ plus community to lean in, to learn more, because when I'm going through themes, like some of the exposure therapy for me is I'll listen to like King Princess on repeat until the compulsions stop.
Mhm.
And that works. I think that exposure therapy is kind of abrasive for some people, so
I mean,
it's
it's
hard.
supposed to be, but
Mhm.
yeah, I remember I texted a friend of mine and I was like, "Hey, if you were I'm just curious because I was sort of exploring the whole like I'm clearly compulsively attracted to the wrong kind of guy like thing." And so I said to her, I was like, if I like if you could set me up with any of the people that we know, like who would it be? And her, because she's in a loving relationship with another woman, her response, even though she knows that I was referring to guys, was, I just think you should date a woman. And
Mhm.
I literally like was like, please fucking stop. Because
Yeah.
I was like, I am I'm not homophobic, but this specific thing, it's such torture because it makes you feel like you're homophobic, because I won't deny it in any way. Like I grew up in a homophobic environment, and so some of it could be internalized homophobia, because what we were saying before, it's like OCD latches onto things that your brain deems taboo. So if you
Mhm.
grew up in an environment where this was taboo, which it may not have been for you, but it was for me.
Yeah, it was not. My mom is like a hippie artist, and
I mean, honestly, like I might find out down the road, like I might come to terms with some notion, and that's okay. And but right now it stresses me the fuck out because I do have OCD. And so whether those are both true for me or not, like
mm,
it doesn't really matter, because I have to everybody has to go at their own pace, and like this is very real, and that could be real, but I don't actually know. And um I do know that I like wildly chaotic men. And
yeah, and if you have an anxiety disorder and you share that with someone and they can't hold space for you, that's fine. That's their experience. I
mhm,
can't deny that maybe my anxiety did drive people away, but articulating things in a way that is violent towards somebody that is like injured or saying I'm leaving you because you're afraid I would, knowing that's one of your triggers,
mhm.
that's a violent thing to say to someone who has OCD. And we'll get into what it means to be a good partner. um but I would encourage you, if you have an anxiety disorder and you are in a relationship with somebody who is not empathetic and cannot hold space for you, to consider the fact that you absolutely deserve someone that can. And I have been with men that do.